And welcome to An Hour with the Candidates on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party. Dan Fishman, executive producer. My name is Pat Ford, and I currently serve as the chair of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. As always, we have a few purposes for this show. We want to give the Libertarian community an opportunity to meet our wonderful down-ballot candidates. We want to challenge those candidates to incorporate what we call here lunch pail voter issues, to discuss them through a libertarian perspective. And of equal importance, we want to share with the nation and with Libertarian Party affiliates the future of the libertarian movement. We want to create a bond between affiliates, between different regions, so that folks understand in Massachusetts the critical importance of races being run by folks like Eric Mulder in Colorado. We want folks in Seattle to understand just what the importance lies in a candidate like tonight's guest, Justin O'Donnell, as a candidate for the United States Senate. The libertarian movement, the philosophy of the party, has an outstanding future. Tonight, and in past nights and months going forward, as we run up to the election, November 3rd, you'll get an opportunity to meet them, to understand the core issues that they face, the challenges in terms of the day-to-day conduct of an election campaign, and find a place perhaps where you can utilize your talents, your skills, your perspective within the libertarian movement as we seek to elect candidates around the nation who at its most fundamental level, the school boards, the water boards, the town halls, the state assemblies, and of course the halls of Congress, who can introduce to a starving public, a needy public, a philosophy that promotes self-ownership, body autonomy, a future for all. Folks, a couple of programming notes for this week. There are ballot access drives taking place around the country as we speak. I had the opportunity last weekend to spend some quality time with the great folks at the Libertarian Party of Maine. This week and in the weeks going forward, I'll be involved heavily in the ballot access drive taking place in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is one of the last states, if not the last state in the nation, to get their ballot access paperwork, and we're the last one with possibly the latest deadline. Folks are working hard in New Hampshire, Maine, Pennsylvania, around the nation. They need your support, both in terms of volunteer abilities. If you're anywhere near any one of those states, reach out to the state parties, get involved. We also need financial support. States around the nation continue to move the goalposts every year, changing the rules, pulling back that football, so that in fact, they try to place us on a defensive status. We'll have none of that. We will get ballot access around this nation. We need your help. You can support ballot access at lp.org/ballot access. Contributions made to that page will be sent to affiliates through the Ballot Access Committee of the Libertarian Party to further these efforts around the nation. Folks, I'm not going to kid you. It's a challenge this year. Not only do we have to worry about issues surrounding physical contact, COVID, social distancing, but the duopoly is afraid of us. They want none of us. The type of constructive engagement that we make with voters, the type of conversations we have, the way that we attack issues around the nation, both on a local and a national basis, the morality of what is, in fact, the libertarian philosophy presents a mortal danger to their continued hold on power. And if events of the last few months haven't shown to you that it's all about power, it has always been about power, it will always be about power, I'm not sure what to say anymore. So we need your support out there. We need it morally, but we can also use it financially. Take a few moments, contribute to the party, because ultimately your efforts will help not only the presidential campaign, but the viability, the support, and the growth of the type of down-ballot campaigns that we talk about on An Hour with the Candidates. Following this show, I'm very careful about leading into plugs on alternative media channels. But on the Coalition, a program that I host, this starting last week with Spike Cohen was a guest, and every week going forward through the campaign, we will have something called Campaign Update, a 20 or 30-minute conversation, a quick piece, with a variety of members of the Jorgensen-Cohen campaign. The point, again, is to bring the election home to you. Last week's guests and this week's guests, in fact, are going to have to call in because they're literally on the road. This week, Carla Howell, she's the longstanding candidate. She herself ran one of the most successful senatorial candidates in Libertarian history in the state of Massachusetts. She is a communication director, and we're going to be talking about issues in messaging. You can watch that at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. And that'll take place about a few minutes after we sign off of here and we get that platform up and running. And we'll be doing that every week. The point on Friday nights, if you can invest an hour and a half, you'll get real insight as to what is happening both at the national and the state and local level for Libertarian candidacies around this nation. But let's get to tonight's business. We've got one candidate on tonight, Justin O'Donnell. Justin O'Donnell is a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. He has been a ballot access warrior, a candidate. He has occupied roles at the Libertarian National Committee, as well as both Massachusetts and state committees. My personal experience with Justin, when we were turning on the lights here in Rhode Island a couple years back, Justin was one of those guys, along with Dan Fishman, and when you had an event, when you had an issue, when you had a challenge and you needed some feet on the street, these are the folks who showed up. Justin has done just about every bit of grunt work imaginable in a political party while simultaneously holding high levels of leadership positions. He is proof positive that you don't need the title to do the work. And when you have the title, you simply use that position, pulpit, to expand the level of work. Frankly, he's one of the most committed people I've met in the movement. And during my brief tenure on the LNC, he served as a mentor to me, for which I will always be grateful. Justin O'Donnell, you are a candidate for the United States Senate. Welcome to An Hour with the Candidates.
Well, thanks for having me on, Pat.
Justin, I got to ask you the same question. We always open up with the same question with all the candidates. But I think it's really telling in this moment because there's a story to tell here. And there's your engagement, what you were involved with, the organization you were involved with, and the manner in which it was deployed immediately prior to you becoming a libertarian has ramifications even to this day. What was your libertarian moment, Justin O'Donnell?
My libertarian moment. Again, I've spoken at length about this. I've written about it, and I unfortunately think it's not that unique of an experience, but I think my libertarian moment was more of a collection of experiences from my time in the United States Army. My time in the United States Army as an infantryman in the Massachusetts National Guard really culminated on a series of domestic missions, domestic security missions, staging in the city of Boston. In 2013, I was in my senior year of college, still in the National Guard, my senior year being my 6th year, because that happens. But I did a couple of security missions during my weekends for a little bit of extra money and some volunteer time within the National Guard. The first of those was the Boston Marathon of 2013. And I had done the marathon security detail the past few years prior to that. And the marathon security detail kind of it was a day where you was relaxing. You stood at a checkpoint. You enjoyed the hundreds of thousands of people who came out to have a great time in one of Boston's biggest party days. And then you went back for a party and everyone got really drunk afterwards. And everything went exactly like that until that afternoon. We never got to go home. 2 explosions ripped through the heart of Boston, right near the finish line. It was deemed it was an intentional terrorist attack. At first, we actually thought it was a gas leak, but very quickly, when the second explosion went off, we figured out it was not. 3 people died, hundreds of people were injured, and we spent the next 48, 72 hours occupying the city of Boston, seeking to, had roadblocks. We manned the subway stations with armed patrols, joining Massachusetts State Police, Boston Police, and every other federal agency. The Coast Guard had bomb squad in the area as well. And believe it or not, that wasn't my libertarian moment. Being part of the occupying force of an American city and imposing martial law in an American city wasn't really what did it for me, what brought me over. It was when a few months later, 4th of July happened. The call came out for volunteers for the military's 4th of July security detail. And I was one of the first ones to sign up. Turns out I ended up being one of the highest ranking enlisted people to sign up. So I ended up being the non-commissioned officer in charge of a company-sized element of junior enlisted soldiers who were manning checkpoints alongside FBI, ATF, DEA, TSA, Massachusetts State Police, Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, all the local police departments sent men in. There were dog patrols. We had camera units set up all over the city for mobile surveillance. And the headlines the next day joked that there were more soldiers than spectators for the 4th of July fireworks. But we had instituted a complete military lockdown of the city of Boston. And in our fear of what had happened just a few months before, we weren't willing to really see the error of our ways in setting those up. And 4th of July, the celebration of freedom, the celebration of the manifestation of liberty in this country, in the cradle of liberty, Boston, the birthplace of the revolution, that year saw a military occupation. And I did not realize really the gravity of the situation until about halfway through the day on that 4th of July. I had a second lieutenant in tow, a fresh second lieutenant who was fresh out of college. And this was his first assignment as a new second lieutenant. And he looked at me, he said, "You know what you're doing. I'm here to learn from you. These are your guys." Cool. And we were delivering water to our checkpoints, so our guys stayed hydrated. And all of a sudden, somebody sat down in front of us in the middle of the sidewalk in a lawn chair and started reading a book. And immediately the lieutenant starts yelling at him, "You can't do this. You're blocking traffic. This is a security zone. You're causing a major issue. If you don't move, you'll be detained and arrested." And at that point, I just started laughing. I lost it. I lost my mind. I just started laughing hysterically. The lieutenant looks at me. He's like, "What's so funny?" I'm like, "Do you see what he's reading?" And the lieutenant turns around. We look down at this guy who sat down in front of us underneath a camera, and he's just reading George Orwell's 1984.
Jesus.
And in that moment, the lieutenant tells me, he's like, "What about it?" And I had to explain the plot of 1984 to a recent college graduate, second lieutenant. And while in the middle of explaining the plot of 1984 to him, I came to the conclusion, oh crap, I'm Big Brother. And what we're doing here is the crux of the problem, the crux of the over-militarization of law enforcement and everything in this country. And this is the first step towards totalitarianism. And to me, that was kind of the culmination of my libertarian moment. But it was the experiences and the knowledge I gained through the military and through my military experience that led me to that point where I was able to have that realization.
You know, you and I have spoken about this before. I was probably, you and I might have walked past each other. We were blocks apart from each other. I worked in Watertown at the time. And
I didn't have a beer back then. So
to me, the most chilling moment was the cheering that day. You know, for me, it was very challenging. I barely made it out of Watertown before the lockdown. I was actually involved in I was driving a plow truck, incredibly enough, and the plow dropped just on the run up to 128, and so I spent 3 or 4 hours with two tow trucks, and we're listening to the news, and we hear about a robbery at MIT, which ended up turning out to be the murder of a very young man who was a police officer on campus there, and this is all happening, and all of a sudden you realize what's going on, We beat it out of there, got out of there just in time. But the chilling notion of watching Americans being at gunpoint, being forced out of their homes for a door-to-door search, an overwhelming police and military presence, which ultimately had failed because the gentleman in question, and I use that term loosely, obviously, the gentleman in question, who, by the way, if you haven't heard the news today, just a few short hours ago, the court threw out the death penalty. But the gentleman in question was actually already outside of the police ring, if you will, that surrounded Boston and what? Yeah, thank you. And so ultimately, on multiple levels, the federal government had failed. There were plenty of warnings through diplomatic and intelligence channels about that there was going to be a disturbance there. It was not relegated to the troops. This is years after our civil liberties had been destroyed in order to tie together the loose ends, as we often say, that had occurred in the run-up to 9/11. Despite all of that, they'd failed miserably. So the irony on this is so many. There's so many layers to it, and it's thick. And if you're a sentient human being, you're paying attention, and you weren't yelling out "oorahs" and you weren't chanting USA as you were being marched down the street, it was a chilling day. And you're talking to someone who was on the receiving end in the mid '90s of the first World Trade Center attack, who was on the receiving end of refugees from the World Trade Center building. So I've, for some reason, Justin, you and I are on the seemingly always on the sidelines of history, sort of Forrest Gump style. Since then, you've decided to take it upon yourself to work, and the emphasis here is work. There are people out there who will virtual signal about work, and there are people who will work. Describe the array of activity. I'm putting you on the spot here, and you're not the type that normally talks about this, but just what different titles and what roles have you played in your tenure with the Libertarian Party?
I mean, it really wasn't until 2016 in the Gary Johnson campaign that I decided to actively get involved. Before that, I was always I deemed myself a small L libertarian Republican. I was elected to the Republican Town Committee and reelected several times in Massachusetts when I lived there before finally leaving the party and joining the Libertarian Party. It was 2016. It was 2012 Gary Johnson that actually convinced me to leave the Republican Party. 2016 Gary Johnson campaign is when I finally joined the Libertarian Party. But in 2012, it was Gary Johnson debating Ron Paul about drug legalization. At the time, the Republican in me said, well, that Ron Paul guy is still a little crazy, but Gary seems pretty reasonable. Nowadays, I was in that position debating Gary about drugs. I'd probably be the one making him look normal to the duopoly, but that's the transition we go through once we're here.
Right.
But in 2016, it was really just the perfect storm of coincidence and timing. I had just lost my job. I was in the middle of standing up my own consulting company in the insurance business. And Chris Crawford had reached out, and I talked to Dan Fishman and Heather Mullins about maybe running for office as a libertarian. I dipped my toes into that, and Chris Crawford asked me to help with the petition drive to get Gary on the ballot in Massachusetts. And I said, screw it. I got the free time. Let's do this. And then I was out there 6 days a week with Chris collecting petitions all over Massachusetts, and just dove feet into it. Like 4 weeks later, after that's when I first met you, Pat, outside of a supermarket petitioning on the Rhode Island border.
Stop and Shop.
Yeah, Stop and Shop in North Attleboro. But from there, I ended up joining the state committee in Massachusetts through the 2016 election. Where helped with the transition of the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts from a PAC to a political party after they'd earned major party status. Then I did have some unfortunate medical and legal issues that had popped up for me in Massachusetts that culminated in the point where it was, okay, do I go to court and fight this, or do I just move to New Hampshire where none of this was illegal, involving my license to carry and guns in Massachusetts. And I ended up making the decision to move to New Hampshire and to this day, Chris Crawford still occasionally likes to reach out to me to tell me that she's mad at me for leaving Massachusetts. But New Hampshire accepted me with open arms. There was not much of an infrastructure of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire when I'd gotten here. One of the first things I did was reached out to the small party that was here and asked them, hey, can we start establishing some county parties and some affiliate parties? And they kind of just gave me the like, okay, if you think you can do it, do it. Reached out to a few of the Gary Johnson campaign folks who were still around and got a county party established in Hillsborough County, for Hillsborough and Merrimack County, the Southern New Hampshire Libertarian Party. At that first meeting, we had 12 members, and I was excited because that 12 members was half the state party. And I'm like, this is fantastic. I did a thing. And they nominated me for chair, and I'm like, no. I already did a thing. But like, I will help the new party do whatever they need to do, but I'm not going to be in charge. Like I brought it this far. I don't want to have the responsibility of being in charge anymore. And they were all like, okay, cool. A few months later, that county party had 40 members, from 12 to 40. And I ended up getting nominated and voted on to the LNC before I knew what happened. And I'm like, wait a second, what happened here? A year and a half ago, I was an independent who was just pissed off, and now I'm on the Libertarian National Committee. But I mean, again, like you said, it goes to show when you actually do the work, it really, really, people see you doing the work. And to this day, like I said, Chris Crawford, and people like her still blame, they'll call me angry that I left Massachusetts and say they want me back to help, but they don't need me back because they still got permanent ballot access. I need to help New Hampshire get it. And you end up getting thrust into positions of leadership as long as you do the work. And as long as you do the work, people don't want to see you leave the positions of leadership.
Now, you're running for the United States Senate.
Yep.
Let's talk about that election, because it's critically important to the state on multiple levels. And folks, if you're just joining us, of course, we're on An Hour with the Candidates on LPTV. Dan Fishman, executive producer. My name is Pat Ford. I serve currently as the chair of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. We're deviating from our normal format a little bit. We're going to give you a list of guests that are coming on in the next few weeks. We've got some powerhouse candidates that are going to be joining us. But tonight we're talking about with Mr. O'Donnell here about a career in the libertarian movement, if you will, what it involves and how quickly you can get right into the heat of battle, as well as a sense of how important it is to run people for office. So, this is a multifaceted campaign. Why is running for the United States Senate in the case of New Hampshire so important?
United States Senate is one of our 2 ballot access races in New Hampshire. So we have a 4% threshold after petitioning onto the ballot as a third-party candidate. If either myself for United States Senate or Darryl Perry, who's running for governor, achieve the 4% bar or the 4% minimum of the statewide race, then 2 years from now, our candidates will not have to conduct a petition drive. For the next 2 years, people, when they go to register vote, will have the option of Libertarian when they choose to register to vote. And 2 years from now, at the next election cycle, instead of collecting 150 signatures, our state rep candidates can just go fill out a piece of paperwork and declare they are running for state rep. Our U.S. Congress candidates can just fill out a piece of paper and declare they are running for state rep without collecting 1,500 signatures. And people will be able to have a open and public primary. And ideally, if we maintain ballot status through the next cycle and the cycle after that, that means in 2024, the Libertarian Party will be able to participate in New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary.
Wow. Wouldn't that be amazing? Do you think, what's that little town in northern New Hampshire? Do you think we can get them to vote the Big L? Perhaps?
So Dixville Notch has actually gone Libertarian before. In fact, there's a litany of elections in the past where there were Libertarians on the ballot that ended up winning in Dixville Notch. I believe Andre Maru actually won both the Libertarian primary and the Republican primary by write-in in Dixville Notch.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
You've fought the battles, if you will, in terms of campaigning, and I want to take a little bit of time and talk about what's real, the nuts and bolts of campaigning. First of all, talk to us about the media challenges, candidates in New Hampshire face.
New Hampshire is not its own media market, for one. New Hampshire has one primary media source, that's WMUR, owned by Hearst Media, an ABC affiliate, but we're primarily just a submarket of Boston Metro Media, which means I see more ads for candidates running in Massachusetts than I do for candidates running in New Hampshire, just because that's the market that's available here. And that's the market we're competing against. And the one station that is New Hampshire specific, WMUR, in the past, again, when we had major party status, they treated us as equal, so to speak, which means they acknowledged that we were running. They gave us the 30-minute interview that they gave everybody else, but they wouldn't let us into the debate unless we met their criteria. Mm-hmm. And they waited until 4 days before the debate to release the criteria, and adjusted the criteria specifically to be right past where we were.
Right. Shocking, eh?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, people joke. It's not a joke. It's a realistic assumption that the presidential debate, just being in the presidential debate for a candidate like Gary Johnson or Joe Jorgensen or any other libertarian candidate, would be the equivalent of $100 million of advertising spending. Mm-hmm. Just because of the reach of that kind of an event. And the localized debates, when you have a small media market that is televised and produced and put out there, it's not inconsequential. This is tantamount to a several $100,000 in-kind donation from the production company to the Republican and Democratic candidates when they exclude us. But us being in that debate would be the equivalent of several $100,000 of advertising spending. And that is something that would be crazy. It would be a game changer for 2 hours of airtime, how much more reach we could do. Right. But again, the bars that they put to our participation are crazy. And in 2018, the 3 criteria that they had to qualify for the debate in New Hampshire was you had to have a campaign staff that wasn't just a candidate. Great. I had a campaign manager, a treasurer, and a volunteer director, and a bunch of volunteers. That counted. We met that. You had to hit 2% and 4% in respective polls. I actually did that, and I did that in a poll they didn't include my name in. Enough people who picked up the phone mentioned my name that it was annotated in the poll as statistically significant, and so they couldn't say I didn't meet the polling threshold. And that was from Emerson College. It wasn't a just throwaway poll online or anything.
Right.
And then so I swear to God, I got a call from a reporter at WMUR out of the blue one day. He's like, I just want to ask you about fundraising. We're doing a piece on fundraising in this race. How much have you raised this year? I told him how much I raised. The next day, WMUR released a debate criteria saying that I had to have raised twice that much. So,
wow. It's yeah. The bar continues to be moved. It's happened in New York. It's happened in literally around the country.
No, and again, that 4%, the 4% to get party status, 2018 was the first time, 2016 was the first time in 20 years the Libertarian in New Hampshire had gotten that 4%, because 20 years ago it was 2%. And after the Libertarian Party got it that time, they raised it. So,
no. Yeah, it defies the imagination at times. What is some of the other barriers? What is a win take in the state of New Hampshire? I mean, roughly, normally we don't really dive into some of these, but I'd like to in the future. In terms of how many votes do you need to win? How spread out is that around the state in terms of concentration? It's from a logistical standpoint. In order to run a campaign that will go head to head, if you will, that can compete with the duopoly.
So there's 1.3 million people in New Hampshire. You'd wager about half of them are registered voters. So we're looking at approximately 750,000. And of them, the turnout the turnout in a normal election, let me do some quick math here. Well, I got my calculator. Hold on. I remember what we did. So,
and it's interesting because on one hand, for candidates, I just want to put this out there at large. You don't want to frustrate or place psychological roadblocks to what are very often are grassroots campaigns, but it's critical to understand the win, what the barriers are.
So in 2016, the last presidential cycle, we had roughly 800,000 people turn out to vote in New Hampshire. The 4% number, that was the secondary win number because it got major party status, was about 32,000 votes. To look at a real win number, we'd have to be looking at about 40% of that 800,000 to give leeway. So we would be looking at about 320,000 votes would be the win number to win a senatorial vote. And quite frankly, I mean, just being realistic, to winning 320,000 votes means 600,000 shaking hands, means 1 million personal interactions, which means getting personal FaceTime and having volunteers or myself shaking hands and talking to at least 1 million people. Again, we're counting people twice because this means we're getting multiple touches. We're reinforcing that, hey, not only are we running, we're running to win. And unfortunately, that's just beyond us and resources. And it's legally prohibitive in the environment of social distancing and COVID-19. I can't be sending people door knocking door to door. That's irresponsible. New Hampshire has an aging population. I can't be hosting mass rallies in Concord and Manchester. Again, it's irresponsible. There's a pandemic going on. And a lot of the people who are the active voter base are either A, young and carriers, or B, old and at risk. So traditional campaigning right now is not an intelligent or responsible thing to do, especially when New Hampshire has been doing so much better than, let's say, our neighbor in Massachusetts. Our neighbors in Massachusetts have been having a terrible time with this pandemic and only been doing as well as they have been because of the proximity of some of the best hospitals in the world. But so that changes really our focus, and we need to transition to digital media, homegrown media. We just started our own campaign podcast, O'Donnell for Liberty. We had our first episode last night. We're going to be doing those regularly, a couple times a week, to try and build the audience virally. We're going to be doing hyper-targeted campaign ads, targeting people specifically based on voter history. We do have lists of people who have registered Libertarian in the past or voted Libertarian in the past through our past election cycles. But again, the secondary win number, 4%, approximately 30 to 40,000 votes. That is a whole different ballgame, but it's a bigger win than one thinks because we can hyper-focus that because New Hampshire's population, again, you talked about population spread and where we are and what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
About 80% of New Hampshire's population lives within 20 miles of the Massachusetts border. We are largely a commuter state. So we have big population centers in Portsmouth, Keene, Nashua, Manchester, Concord. Those 5 cities alone are going to make up a huge bulk of the state's voting population. So while I might not be able to talk to 300 to 600,000 people individually, I might be able to target ads and reach 600,000 people locally. And when we start realizing that we can hyper focus things locally like that within major population centers, then the shift of focus becomes the realization that I'm running for a statewide office. I'm running for United States Senate. I'm running for probably the most unwinnable race a libertarian has in New Hampshire right now. But what can I do? And what can my campaign do to make sure that everything we are doing is supporting those running beneath us? That our actual goal in running is to make it easier for them to run in the future and easier for them to win. And that's when I start to hyper-focus on our county offices. In Hillsborough County, the most populous county in the state, where a significant portion of the state's total population lives, we have 2 county-wide office candidates. both of whom are running in winnable races based on their resume, their qualifications for office, and and in one of their cases, their history of being a current elected office holder in a similar position in the district. We have Richard Manzo, who's running for county treasurer, and we have Nicholas Sarwark, former chair of the National Party, who's running for county attorney. To me, those are actually our two most important races in New Hampshire, because those are the two where we can make the most impact and biggest difference right away.
Right. And that's, of course, the beauty of these what are and called down ballot candidates. And it's interesting because people will often think that's a pejorative term, down ballot. But again, as we pointed out on this show, and we've had Mr. Manzo on this show, and I'm going to reach out to Mr. Sarwark, those are the jobs that impact people immediately. That's the break glass, add water, instant change in life kind of positions that where a libertarian philosophy, and again, one need only look to one of the official heroes of the show. Of course, we're talking about Kara Schultz, to understand that a well-run, not just candidacy, and I hate to use this term with libertarians listening, so put down any hot liquids, but governing as a libertarian responsibly and staying true to our philosophy can be a life-changing event to the people in that constituency. Now, I also want to point out something else, a really critical but often understated point. The advantages of ballot access is being able to register as a libertarian. Why is that important? Because then you understand who your initial target base is. People who may not be active in the party, but who register as libertarians. And because you are recognized by the state, you can understand exactly who they are and focus like a laser on those people. How important is that?
It's critically important. Again, excuse me. Libertarians are terrible at talking about the importance of data because, and I think this is a kind of a flaw in the fact that we are small. Our organization tends to comprise of candidates and their teams and another candidate and their team, and sharing our resources between another candidate and their team. And in the end, we're all candidates. I'm running for Senate. The guy helping me place all my yard signs and put all my walking list together, oh, he's running for Congress. We don't really have people who are sitting back. I'm not running for anything. All I'm doing is focusing on data. The reason the Oakland Athletics almost won the World Series with the cheapest team in baseball is because they recognized the importance of data. And they changed Major League Baseball forever when they did that. As soon as libertarians start grasping the importance of data and change the way we campaign entirely around that data, it's going to drastically change the results we're going to get. And when we can see that there's a large chunk of people in Nashua, New Hampshire, registering libertarian that we never knew were libertarian, but they went out of their way to register libertarian, well, holy crap, let's go to Nashua. We need to find these people. Then we can get those people involved and grow our base. That's our new fundraising base. I need to send them a letter. I need to ask them to not just register, donate. You took the time out of your day on a weekday in New Hampshire. You can't register to vote online. You have to go during business hours during the week to town hall to register to vote. These people took time out of their work day to go register to vote as a libertarian. It was important enough to them. And they didn't wait all the way until election day like they could have. They went early. They thought it was important enough. I need their contact information. I don't know who they are. They're not obligated to give it to me, but if people can start registering libertarian, that becomes a big enough subset of the population, then that's publicly available data through the Secretary of State that we can then get their contact information, reach out to them and say, hey, you took those extra steps. Let's take one more.
Right.
Here, get your membership, join the party. How about run for school board? How about run for library trustee? How about run for moderator or election clerk or something? Because that's the data we're missing. And in states like Massachusetts, where they have the election data freely available to political parties and they allow people to register as libertarian. That's something we're missing out on, getting that list and hammering home and targeting that. In New Hampshire, it's a little bit different. That list costs $8,500 a year to get from the Secretary of State, and the data is 4 years old. So we really have to wait till next year anyways to see who registered as a libertarian 3 years ago. But again, it's worth pursuing and it's worth incorporating into our campaigns.
Folks, again, if you're just joining us, we are an hour with the candidates. My name is Pat Ford. I'm the Rhode Island Libertarian Chair. Joining me on the line is Justin O'Donnell, who has worked virtually every aspect of the libertarian movement. Before we get into issues, which is the sort of the traditional fodder for this show, if you will, you are a master at petitioning. Can you, and let's just say, asking for a friend, let's just say hypothetically, you had a group of people in arguably one of the bluest states in the nation operating in 90+ degree heat and needing 1,000 good signatures in the space of 5 weeks, where virtually no commercial business will entertain politics anymore in the midst of a pandemic. Now, that's a hypothetical. You got any tips on how to approach people literally and get them to sign the magic form?
So, hey, Pat, just like you, I work in sales for a living. I do a lot of coaching and training as part of what I do within the brokerage side of insurance sales. One of the key, fundamental sales programs that I do teach kids is called Impact. We're going to make an impact. And that's not out of the blue. It's Impact's the name of the program and stands for we're going to initiate the conversation. We're going to make a friend. We're going to probe and find problems. We're going to advise. We're going to close and then take it home. That's our impact. Petitioning, the biggest crucial step in petitioning is step one, initiating the damn conversation. So many libertarians are afraid to approach a stranger. They're afraid to have a conversation in public with somebody they don't know. And it doesn't have to be as complicated and as scary as people want to make it. When I am out petitioning, I rarely ask people qualifying questions, or I rarely ask people their affiliation. I don't make it about me or my candidate or my politics or my philosophy. I have a mission. My mission is to get this paper signed by as many people as possible. The campaign comes later. Petitioning doesn't have to be an outreach activity, because if you don't finish the petition drive, you're campaigning for nothing. So to me, it's as simple as separating that mentality. When I'm petitioning, I'm not campaigning. I am doing things as quick as possible and moving on to the next person. I'm standing outside a supermarket, stopping every single person who goes in or out of that door. Hey, would you sign a petition to expand voter choice? That's it. If there's a follow-up question, what do you mean? I'm getting a third party on the ballot. What third party? The Libertarian Party. No, thank you. Bye. I'm not wasting my time trying to convince you. There's 3 people in line behind you. It's a game of numbers. When you talk to every single person, 1 in 100 is going to sign it just to shut you up. 1 in 100 is going to sign it on the first question. 1 is going to sign it on the third question. Some people are going to know exactly what you're doing because they're involved, but I think the biggest problem we're making when we're petitioning in these petition drives is we have too many people who are trying to campaign instead of petition. And unfortunately, if we don't succeed while petitioning, we're not going to get the chance to campaign.
Wow, that's an outstanding perspective. There are people right now literally across this country sweltering in the worst imaginable circumstances, trying to get this done. So I know we're going to take that to heart tomorrow at our event here in Rhode Island.
So, and again, I'm out tomorrow morning myself petitioning. We did have a victory in court here in New Hampshire where a federal judge.
Give us the good news. Talk about that. Give us all the insight, because there's some guy named Sununu there.
Chris Snoo. Yeah. Kara posted up in the comments earlier. She wanted me to talk about how awful Secretary Gardner is. And believe it or not, this is one instance where I don't think he was that awful. He is the longest serving Secretary of State in the history of the country. He's historically resistant to third parties or any kind of change whatsoever. They still keep the voter rolls in Concord in a spreadsheet, not on a computer, like in a logbook. I don't know if the Secretary of State knows how to turn on a computer. He's that old and that out of touch. There's $15 million sitting in their HAVA account at the Secretary of State's office, which was allocated from a federal budget 10 years ago to help improve technology in the Secretary of State's office and improve voter access, that he just refuses to touch because he doesn't want to change anything. But when this pandemic rolled around, our executive committee, Richard Manzo, Gilletta Jarvis, spent a great deal of effort reaching out to the Secretary of State's office to try to reach a compromise with them. Like, hey, we want to get on the ballot. We're going to petition onto the ballot, but there's a goddamn pandemic going on. Is there any possible way you can work with us to find a way to do this that doesn't involve mass public contact and me having petitioners circulating around the state and engaging elderly and at-risk populations in the middle of a pandemic? And the Secretary of State's office, from all reports back to us, the candidates, was on board. The Secretary of State told himself, he's like, yeah, it's kind of dumb. There's no sense in doing this right now in these conditions. It wouldn't be hard for us to revert back to 2 years ago. You guys have made the ballot every year for the past 18 elections. It doesn't make sense to not let you on now because of a pandemic. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State lacks the statutory authority under New Hampshire law to make any adjustments to that. So the Secretary of State was powerless to help us. The Secretary of State wanted to help us. The Secretary of State didn't want to deal with us handing him 5,000 sheets of contaminated paper. He's in his 80s. He advised the governor, they advised the governor's office that they should issue an executive order. Since the House was out of session, the House could not act on it. That would automatically place us on the ballot. The governor's office ignored it for a week, then 2 weeks, then a month, constant contact, trying to get an answer. They kept just ignoring it. Finally, a reporter from WMUR, John DeStazo, during a governor's press conference on a COVID update, stood up and said, Governor Sununu, real big question. Are you ever going to answer the request about ballot access for third-party candidates like the Libertarians during this pandemic? And the governor said, no, I'm not even looking at it. It would be a conflict of interest for me to put someone on the ballot to run against me. And the moment he said those words, the NHCLU started backing us and said, yep, we're going to court. We're suing him. He's not going to make this happen. We're going to make it happen. And then the state's attorney kept fighting to delay the case and push it back. And they kept trying to demand an in-person trial. And by the end of it, federal court granted us a trial via Zoom. Myself, Daryl Perry, and Gilletta Jarvis were all called as witnesses to testify. I missed the majority of the trial. I don't know what happened for the majority of it because I was the final witness and the judge sequestered us, so we couldn't watch the trial. So I was left out blind.
Really?
I was for the entire first day of trial. I sat there staring at a waiting room screen on Zoom, like this is awful, with no clue what was going on. But in the end, judge issued a ruling this past week, reducing the number of signatures we needed to collect by 35% to account for the time that the stay-at-home order was in effect where we weren't allowed to petition. And so tomorrow is our last day of our petition drive. Myself and one of our congressional candidates, A.J. Olding, are going out to the Vermont border to a small town named Claremont to help one of our state rep candidates get the final signatures he needs to secure his place on the ballot.
Now, again, outstanding effort. I'd also like to note there are a variety of New Hampshire folks out there working on behalf of their neighbor in Maine this past weekend, which is, that's the type of regional teamwork that, that we all need. You guys in Massachusetts and New Hampshire have always been great to the folks in Rhode Island. And that's the point of this program, to foster that level of cooperation, understanding, and thank you for just elaborating so extensively on the process so that people understand in those states that have been blessed with perhaps easier circumstances, exactly what's at work. And again, if I could do the bidding of the party here, why it's so important if you're in a position, and we know it's difficult, these are challenging times financially, but if you're in a position to help petition or in a position to support financially the professional petitioning that's gone on in selected places around the nation, please either volunteer, donate money to your local affiliate, or donate money to the party. And again, I want to stress at all these different way stations, your efforts and or your financial considerations can be directed exclusively at petitioning, if in fact that's your desire. And how important it, Justin, around the country is the being able to buttress these efforts with some level of professional petitioning.
It's incredibly important, especially this year. I testified in court, especially to that fact. In 2016, we managed to get the 3,000 petitions plus in New Hampshire done in a week with exclusively paid professional petitioners. Myself at the time and a group of people who came up from Massachusetts to petition, but we got it done real quick, real easy. It was a different year. We had mostly volunteers in Massachusetts. I was a volunteer in Massachusetts. Dan Fishman volunteered an immense amount of his time. Chris Crawford volunteered almost full time for that drive when it was necessary. But this year is different. I can't find volunteers who are willing to put themselves at risk. And I don't really find it comfortable to ask volunteers to go engage with 5,000 people a day. Go talk to 5,000 strangers a day for me at a supermarket in a major city near you. It's not something I'm comfortable asking people to do, and it's not something people are really comfortable taking on themselves in an unpaid position, uncompensated position. Right. And a lot of the people who are willing to do it, again, it's not like this all happened back when the furloughs were going on and people were out of work and had the free time to do everything either. But again, that's when the pandemic was at its worst. Most of the people who I would normally be even paying to do this just came off furlough. And they're like, I already missed 3 months of work. Even though you're paying, I can't actually take another 2 weeks off of work, or else my job won't actually be there to go back to.
Right.
And so the circumstances this year just changed it to the point where it's hard to find people to put in the streets to help.
You know, you talk about sales training, and I know you've written books about this. You've engaged professionally on a consulting as well as on a corporate basis. The other objection that folks are running into, and this is, it's interesting. My experience in Maine, and you know, I was, and by the way, anyone who looks to the imaging that certain large corporations like Whole Paycheck and Trader Joe's and organizations like that as being parts of the community and caring about their effort and the teamwork necessary to overcome. Yeah, right. I got booted out of Trader Joe's like you read about. But interestingly enough, the biggest objection that I ran into, and I know this has gone from a class on a campaign to a class on petitioning, this is critical stuff. Was not so much the COVID objection. I didn't find a lot of that in Maine. What I found was that particularly at left of center organizations, you know, $5, Whole Paycheck, Trader Joe's, places like that, there was this fear that exhibited itself demonstrably, not just people talking, but you could tell by their body language, was their fear that something that would get in the way of defeating Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on that?
I've seen exactly that, and I've seen exactly the opposite. People who like cringe up and have an excruciating fear that I might cause Trump to lose, and right. They can't fathom a reality. And again, I said petitioning is not campaigning. We need to separate the two because they get in the way of each other. We campaign after we're on the ballot, but you're going to run into some circumstances where you have to have the conversation with people because circumstantially it's forced. And I get a lot of people saying, yeah, you're going to cause Trump to lose. I'm like, I thought I caused Trump to win last time. Keep it straight. And you just point out to people, the simple fact is exit polling of Libertarian and Green voters in 2016 showed that 70% of third-party voters would not have voted at all had their first choice not been on the ballot. And that's something we need to address. And if we can't address that by making sure that everyone's choices are represented on the ballot, and maybe the fact that everyone's choices aren't represented on the ballot is why 100 million Americans stayed home and didn't vote when they were eligible.
Mm-hmm.
then maybe
Absolutely.
we need to address how the system isn't working to begin with.
Absolutely. I want to point out to people that right now the federal government, and particularly in different parts of the country, state governments, local municipalities are working overtime to provide for paper, by mail balloting, all sorts of different approaches to getting the physical vote to take place. And generically, as long as it's well done, I applaud that. But at the same time, if the same system creates significant barriers to entry to prevent you from voting for whom you want to, then that is the same type of discrimination. That is the same type of, and I'm going to use the word that particularly folks left of center hate, that you are actively disenfranchising voters. It's simply not enough to be able to vote. You need the opportunity to vote for those folks that follow your belief system. And that's a point that as libertarians, we need to reinforce at every single opportunity, on one-on-one conversations, speaking to crowds, on the media, whatever opportunity you can take. Right now, the United States of America actively works to disenfranchise millions of voters. They do it in a stealthy, obnoxious way, but they do it just the same. Just so we just got a couple of minutes. I don't think we talked on issues at all. Right now, we're all sort of in this ballot mode. But in the couple of minutes we have left, what are New Hampshire voters looking to and for from federal candidates at this point? You are still technically the live free and die state, although the Massachusetts, if you will, introduction into the gene pool has surely changed the outlook on politics in the southern portions of the state. What are you going to take to the people?
I'm bringing to the people the fact that they matter. Okay. Right now, we have Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan as our two United States senators, both former governors, both family legacies whose parents were former governors and former senators. New Hampshire and Chris Sununu, our current governor, his father and uncle were former governors and former senators. It's a legacy state. People are not represented by people. People are represented by political interests and political legacies. And from that, we get people who are more concerned about getting reelected and getting elected to higher office than they are about actually improving the quality of life for people here in the live free or die state or in the Granite State. We have people like Chris Sununu, who is kowtowing and joining hands with Democrat Jean Shaheen across party lines to oppose ending the drug war because the pharmaceutical industry are the leading donors to both campaigns. And while we are surrounded on all sides from Vermont, Massachusetts, Maine, Montreal, and Quebec, where the drug war has scaled down and turned back, and people are legalizing marijuana and victimless drug crime, we're seeing opioid use plummet. We're seeing economic growth in sectors that did not exist before the legalization of marijuana. We are seeing overall crime plummet. And that's something that needs to be addressed on a federal level and a state level, while candidates and politicians and governors and lobbyists and groups in surrounding states all around us are making steps in a positive direction. The political dynasties of New Hampshire are leaving the people behind, and we are still suffering because of it. We are losing an estimated $400 million a year in revenue to Massachusetts marijuana shops. Those are things that could be helping fund our local schools. They could be reducing our property tax burdens, and they could be helping the people of New Hampshire surpass and overcome this epidemic of opioid deaths.
Hell of a stump speech, buddy. Hell of a stump speech. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. We got a minute or two left. This is what we usually typically engage in, what we call shameless self-promotion. You've laid out a textbook case of why your candidacy needs to succeed at some level. You need to break that 4% in order to facilitate the growth of our movement, our ascension into political office, our ability then to use that, as again our hero Kara Schultz would, to quote unquote, you ready? Govern, but govern as libertarians. How can folks send you the money?
I saw in the comments, we're not going to govern, we're just going to manage.
There you go. Okay. I like that. I like that a lot. Where can folks donate, buddy?
So O'Donnell2020.com. That's ODONNELL 2020.com. Two big buttons right on the front page, both gold, both bold. One says donate, one says volunteer. Both are equally important. We need volunteers to actually do things. We need volunteers who are going to be making phone calls, volunteers placing signs, volunteers hosting events, so we can actually meet people throughout the state. If you're local to New Hampshire, please, please, please hit that volunteer button. The other big gold and bold button is donate. Even if you're not in New Hampshire, you can help us. In 2018, the fundraising threshold that was put in place to keep me out of the debates was $20,000. We're setting a minimum fundraising goal of $25,000 to surpass that, which was used to exclude us in 2018 and give us a fighting chance to break in. And that's not just for me. Again, Darryl Perry is going to have the same debate access issue himself. Our candidates in New Hampshire need the most visibility possible. New Hampshire is one of only 3 states that's ever elected a Libertarian. I want to do it again.
Outstanding. Again, for those folks who might focus on the negative, this show continually brings to you individual candidacies, individual volunteers, individual libertarians who, by their own sheer sacrifice, their own incredibly brutal work ethic, are managing, sometimes through sheer force of will, to change the direction of this country. They need your support. Folks, you've been listening to An Hour with the Candidates, a production of LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, executive producer Dan Fishman. My name is Pat Ford. If you'd like to join us on the show, hourwiththecandidates@gmail.com, or find me on the Facebook, or find Dan. Reach out to us. Our goal is nothing less than to somehow find a way to get every single down ballot candidate running here in these United States as a libertarian onto this show. We're going to be talking about expanding our hours, a couple more shows. Folks, reach out and support these people. Next week, another powerhouse edition of Hour with the Candidates. Meredith Vaca, she is a New Yorker. She is a prosecutor. She is running for a judgeship. When you see this resume, it's going to blow you away. The opportunity here is just astonishing in a state like New York to have someone like Meredith Vaca running for a judgeship. A very special candidacy has emerged in the state of Arkansas. Ricky Dale Harrington in a 2-way race for these United States Senate with a troubled competitor, a gentleman by the name of Cotton in Arkansas. He's going to join us next week. I can't wait. I leave this show every Friday pumped. When you listen to these candidates, you should too. Folks, thank you for listening. Have a great weekend. Go out there and support the petitioners around the country. Get us on the ballot. That's how we affect change. We'll see you next Friday night.